Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Les Smith. I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's webinar, Wolverine Worldwide's Groundwater Surface Water Interface Investigation Summary and Work Plan Report. Thank you for joining us. I have a couple of housekeeping slides, which will be not new to many of you, but might be new to a few. So I'll go through those quickly. I just want to let you all know that the webinar is being recorded, and so you'll be able to watch this later on our EGLE YouTube channel and the Michigan PFAS Action Response page. I also want to let you know that all of your lines are muted right now, but I want to let you know that you can talk to our panel tonight in a number of ways. You can type your questions in the Q&A box located in the bottom of your screen here in Zoom. During the Q&A portion of the conversation this evening, you can also raise your hand and I will look for your hand and unmute your mic so you can ask a question to tonight's panel. And presently for our panelists who are waiting here, we don't have anyone on the phone, but we will revisit the phone instructions later should we have anyone on the phone. With that, I'd like to introduce Abby Hendershot, who is the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team Executive Director, who will have some opening remarks and introduce our panel.
All right, thanks, Les. Thanks everybody for coming tonight and talking with us about this important topic. I am Abby Hendershot, the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team Executive Director, and happy to be with you tonight. We're going to have a couple of people on standby for answering questions. Our main presenter today will be Karen Voris, our RD Project Manager. Also got on tap Dave Bandlow, our Grand Rapids District Supervisor, Mark Worrell, our Senior Geologist, and Danielle Allison Yoakum, our Assistant Attorney General. Next slide. So tonight we're going to go through this information session specifically on the GSI work plan. We're going to talk about ways that you can submit your written official comment and who to contact with further questions. So Karen will go through all of that in the slides and more, but always know you can type in your questions in the chat or in the question and answer box, and always feel free to reach out to us afterwards if you don't get your questions answered. So next slide, I think, is Karen's.
Great, thanks, Abby. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And it should pop right up.
Looks good. Looks
Great.
good. Take it away, Karen.
Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. Good to see you all, even though I can't see you. I can see some names in the attendees that I recognize, mostly all of them. I know it's a nice evening, so we do appreciate you taking the time to tune in live. This is obviously being recorded, so it will be posted on the EGLE's YouTube webpage, and then also on the www.michigan.gov/Belmont, the House Street website. So if folks couldn't make it tonight, you can view it at a later time, which is convenient. So again, as everyone probably knows, some of you may not, my name is Karen Voris. I am the project manager here in the Remediation Redevelopment Division in Grand Rapids District, overseeing Wolverine's response actions under the consent decree. And currently right now, we are in a public comment period, which started on May 27th, lasting through July 6th, approximately 40 days. On this particular submittal from Wolverine Worldwide, the Groundwater Surface Water, or GSI for short, interface investigation summary, and also containing a work plan report. So this is the document we're going to be focusing on tonight and discussing. And really the main goal, the purpose of tonight's meeting is not for EGLE, for us to give any of our review or any of our comments, but rather just present the plan as it was submitted to us. We want to make sure you all understand what the plan is saying, what the requirements are of the governing consent decree, and then really answer any questions you have to kind of equip you in order to participate and provide your written comments during this public comment period. So my presentation We're obviously going to start with just a quick overview of the February 2020 consent decree, and specifically focusing on what is required as part of the GSI, or groundwater surface water interface pathway requirements on the Rogue River. We'll summarize, we'll go over what the results were of the initial GSI investigation that Wolverine consultant GZA completed end of last year in November, December, and then early January this year. Then we'll go over kind of the work plan portion that has the proposed permanent groundwater surface water interface monitoring well locations. And then we'll kind of go over the anticipated next steps and how you can provide your written public comments during this comment period. And then we'll open it up for any questions that anyone has. So just a reminder, if there's, sometimes we do get folks attending from out of state or just curious about the area. We like to remind people that there is a consent decree that has been court approved. It's a legal agreement between the state of Michigan, Plainfield, and Algoma townships, and Wolverine Worldwide, which became effective on February 19th, 2020. It does serve as kind of the framework for all of the PFAS response activities performed by Wolverine in what's called the North Kent Study Area. So this is only applies to this area and this figure that's shaded in this gray, outlined in black. That is what this agreement refers to. Nothing outside, only things that are, inside of this box. And so you can see we go as far north as 12 Mile, as far south as the Grand River, as far west as Pine Island Drive, all the way east to downtown Rockford. Approximately 20-25 square miles. And this legal agreement does govern Wolverine's response actions pertaining to PFAS contamination, and they have to conduct these activities under Eagle oversight. Hence why we're having this meeting tonight, because we're reviewing the work plan. So there is quite a few different requirements of response activities in the consent decree document itself. If you're interested in looking at the full document, you can look at it on our website at www.michigan.gov/Belmont. It is available for viewing on there. But tonight, obviously we are focusing on section 7.10, which is the GSI investigation portion requirement. If you're interested in any of the other response activities, you can look at those corresponding sections or paragraphs within the consent decree. But this is where this submittal falls into play under the consent decree. So specifically within section or paragraph 710, it refers to this particular work plan. And so within 90 days, we're in paragraph 710, sub B, little c, and little d. Within 90 days of completing the work required by the previous paragraph, which was, we'll be going over the results from the November, December, and January sampling. After they received all of that data within 90 days, Wolverine had to submit a work plan for Eagle for installation of the needed permanent GSI monitoring wells for our review and approval. There's some specifications guiding, the number of locations with at least 1 to 3 per location, wells per location, not exceeding 80 wells total. Obviously, this is part of the consent decree, so there were some numbers put in place for minimum requirements and maximum requirements. Upon our approval of the work plan that was submitted that we're reviewing, Wolverine has to initiate the work outlined in the plan within the approved schedule and then conduct quarterly sampling for 1 year. That's important. We want to see seasonally what is happening. So 1 quarter is not good enough for Eagle. We like to see at least 4 quarters or 1 year's worth of data. to make sure we fully understand exactly any seasonal variations and things like that in our compliance monitoring wells, these permanent monitoring wells, which we'll get into a little bit more. So what exactly is included in this document, this GSI summary investigation and work plan document? Well, obviously, the first part of it is a summary of the initial GSI investigations. That was work that was done last year under a response activity plan that we sent out for public notice as well. We had a meeting like this for that. So that was that work that was completed between kind of the end of October and again through January 2021. It mostly included piezometers. We went over those, installation of those piezometers, measuring of staff gauges, and then pore water sampling. Kind of those three main items were completed as part of that GSI investigation. And now, number two, kind of the second part of this document is the work plan to install the permanent groundwater nested monitoring wells clusters. And again, that's what the requirements are specifically under 710 B, C, and D. So in particular, this work plan is going to be evaluating the potential risks to the Rogue River that were identified based on the pore water sampling and groundwater sampling. We want to know further our understanding of the groundwater elevation at the interface of the groundwater and surface water. We want to know gradient and any flux happening at the groundwater surface water interface. And then we also want to get a better understanding of the concentrations and defining that better that are discharging into the Rogue River to kind of build on the initial investigation. So this is a figure that's pulled off of the House Street Belmont website on MPART's website. This is kind of just to remind everyone the area that we're dealing with and what was investigated and being investigated. And it will be interesting to show you how, you know, a lot of us have been working on this for, you know, over 4 years now. And the data that Eagle, in conjunction with some other, you know, GZA and our consultant, we've kind of put together this overall map to kind of help show how we interpret things that are going. And you'll see that the pore water sampling results match up pretty close to where we have our blue flow lines, groundwater flow lines, of where we think kind of the major PFAS plumes are located, or the dash lines where kind of the secondary plumes are located. So I just wanted to show this overall picture. We have the House Street disposal site here, just west of US 131 and south of 10 Mile. We had GZA Wolverine investigate kind of to the northeast of that along the Rogue River. And then also to the southeast, which, you know, is kind of the main arm or the main primary plume coming off of the House Street dump site, headed right toward the Rogue River. Kind of this whole general area down gradient was included in that initial investigation. And then north of 10 Mile, in regards to what's called the Woven Jewel source area, we had 3 separate areas that we had GZA conduct pore water testing, piezometer, staff gauge readings, where we also had concerns of water, PFAS impacted groundwater discharging into the Rogue River in these areas. So again, an arm to the northwest, to the northeast, just south of 12 Mile here. And then also this one that's not as well known, but we also still had concerns kind of to the southeast of that area, because of course these sites are both on groundwater divides. Again, the former tannery is being addressed under a separate response activity plan, which we had a meeting for last month. So just so people realize why that's not included in this kind of addresses the Rogue River and other areas not right at the tannery site. Okay, so this map is a little crazy. So I'll try to break it down and make it as clean and simple as possible. Hopefully you have large screens to be able to view this on. So here we are. We have the House Street site, source site, and then the Woven Jewel source area. And we kind of have these, they broke it in their maps in this report to kind of summarize the investigation they did. They broke it into kind of 3 areas. So kind of the northwest, we have more of the northeastern, east, and then the southeast area. So when we go through the results and through what was done, we're going to kind of focus in on these 3 areas. Again, between October 2020 through January 2021, GZA, on behalf of Wolverine, installed 16 piezometers, which again were just those hand-driven, small stainless steel type of slotted pipe right along the edges of the river. They were measuring water levels in there to make sure that, and the staff gauges that were existing on the Rogue River, and a few more were installed. Again, just making sure that comparing the water levels from the groundwater formation compared to the water levels within the actual river to verify that the stream or that the river was ganging, meaning groundwater venting into it. So that's kind of was the purpose of that, to do that groundwater flow evaluation. Then they had to take readings of the piezometers and staff gauges. They did that over 3 weeks, and they did 3 readings per week, so a total of 9 groundwater gauging events. That was specifically between November 9th through November 27th. And based on that, they were able to then move on to the next phase, which was actually collecting the pore water samples from the sediments of the Rogue River. So again, a total of 39 pore water samples were collected, and then 7 groundwater samples from some of the piezometers and some of the existing monitoring wells that were located kind of near the edge of the river, for a total of 46 samples were collected as part of this, analyzed for PFAS specifically. You can see again kind of the 3 main areas to the northeast, the pore water. We'll get into more detail in these in a minute, but we're going to look at the green circles, half green, half black circles are the actual pore water sample locations along the Rogue River here. And we'll look at those locations specifically, and then on the same figure, we'll see where Wolverine is proposing to install their nested monitoring, permanent monitoring wells to further define and understand the discharges to the Rogue River. So of these 46 samples that were collected, none of the samples exceeded criteria for PFOA, which is one of, is a PFAS compound, one of which we have water quality standards for. That level is 12,000 parts per trillion. It's quite a bit higher than our level for PFOS. So we normally don't see exceedances for PFOA very often. Usually it is PFOS that is the driver. So in this case, our criteria, or the water quality standards for the GSI pathway for groundwater venting into surface water, is 12 parts per trillion. So you have 12,000 versus 12. And 32 of the 46 samples were greater than that 12 parts per trillion. The other 14 samples were either less than the 12 parts per trillion or were non-detect in the laboratory analysis. And we'll go over kind of where we saw the highest concentrations and what work is proposed to better understand that and define that with our permanent monitoring wells. Just kind of wanted to give you just a general overview of the results, how many results we're dealing with, and just the general breakdown of that. Okay, so moving on to where we'll be focusing in on and what Wolverine is proposing based on this initial round of sampling. So overall, as part of this work plan, 17 new proposed GSI nested well sampling locations. So again, it's one location that could potentially have up to 3 nested wells at that one location are proposed, plus one existing well location that will be used. So a total of 18 GSI kind of permanent monitoring points. Those locations are shown on figures 6A, 6B, and 6C in the work plan. And so this work plan is going to outline kind of, the next phase, the first round of drilling. Wolverine does admit that this is the kind of the first proposed round, and based on the results of these, step out borings could very well be required in order to get outside and outside the areas that exceed 12, because again, we want to know where those discharge boundaries are. So there could be additional wells that are needed based on these 17 wells clusters that are installed. And again, there's sections in the report that discuss where the monitoring wells will be placed as close as they can be to the Rogue River. Wolverine kind of gives a general estimate of between 50 and 500 feet, depending on the location and the terrain. Obviously, we would like them as close as possible as we can get to the Rogue River to appropriately be able to monitor this pathway. And then at each of these locations, they're going to install a soil boring to approximately 50 feet below the groundwater table. And they will be conducting vertical aquifer profile sampling. So basically every 10 feet within the water column, they're stopping, collecting a sample, pushing down, stopping, collecting a sample. So if there is groundwater encountered, so it would be like they would sample between 5 and 10 feet below the groundwater table, 15 to 20 feet, 25 to 30 feet, 35 to 40 feet, and 45 to 50 feet, assuming that they encounter groundwater in that whole water column. It's continuous. Obviously, they may have to adjust the vertical aquifer profiling intervals based on field observations, or if we get it, just different lithologies out there, they may need to adjust that. So then they're going to use that data to evaluate and determine the location for the placement of the monitoring well screens, these permanent wells, to try to delineate the lateral extent of each discharge area, where we're having the PFAS discharge into the Rogue River above that 12 parts per trillion. So there's a section in there that describes that process. And I think that's kind of all I wanted to just point out on this slide. And then we'll get into more detail of each of these areas now as we go along. So the first area we're looking at the results for is kind of the Woven Northwest area. So again, we're north of 10 Mile Road right here, just west of US 131. This is kind of that arm, that plume that's coming up from the Woven Jewel Source area. That's just outside this map and coming to discharge up into the Rogue River in this area. This is a figure that's included in the report, 6A. I have a figure that's following this that kind of superimposes that one map in the beginning that I showed you, Eagle's map, kind of underneath this map, so you can see how this lines up with the residential well sampling results and our monitoring well sample results, because that was not necessarily included on any maps in this submittal. So sometimes it's easier to visualize where these are located, taking into account not just the pore water sampling data, but also the overall groundwater and drinking water data in the area. So that will be the next figure. But based on the pore water sampling, you know, these two pore water samplings were non-detect for PFOS. This was kind of the northwest off that House Street there. However, when we get up here further to the north, we do have a hit of PFOS at 260 parts per trillion. So obviously that is over our 12. And, you know, it gives the depth below kind of the surface how deep in the sediments we are. So 1.5 to 1.63 was where their sample was taken. It's the other pore water sampling results up here were just below 12. You know, we have an 11, a 10, a 7, and a 9.7 in these pore waters. However, this one just south of the 260 pore water, 4 had PFOS at 100. So in this area, you see the green box right here. This is the proposed GSI monitoring well, nested well location. They're proposing one just to the south of that 100, close to where we had the highest PFOS at 260, and then to the north, they're proposing monitoring well cluster right there. So those are the 3 locations they are currently proposing there. Let me go to the next slide to kind of show you how this overlays. So if you look, you can see here's the 3 nested well sets. Here's the one that's to the south right here. You can see the green dots in the background are drinking water samples. The triangles are monitoring well groundwater samples. Green is non-detect, red is above any PFAS drinking water standard. So 8 for PFOA and 16 for PFOS. That's the drinking water standards. So this is kind of where the main plume comes up. And again, the highest pore water sample we found lines up within where we have this groundwater plume. So it does match up pretty well with where our concerns were. And again, you know, obviously we're accepting comments on if you think the 3 is enough. We obviously have our own comments that we're coming up with, but that's kind of, you know, what we would be looking for, or if you had any other comments or concerns about things, that's what we want to hear about. But these are the 3 locations as proposed in the plan. Moving on to kind of the larger area to the northeast and the North Childsdale area, as it's called, is kind of just south of 12 Mile Road here. You know, here we have the Rogue River coming down. Right here's 10 Mile. So 10 Mile and Childsdale is the street right here. So that's why it's called the North Childsdale area, or dead ends right here into 10 Mile. So again, this is the Wolvern Jewel source area. If you remember that one figure, we'll look at the next slide. We have what we believe is multiple plumes coming in different directions, following different pathways, different former stream channels, fluvial paths, fans, and it's a very complex geologic environment. And so that's why you see quite a few more samples in this area that we wanted targeted. And so the highest pore water sample that we had in this area, 230 parts per trillion PFOS, which was right here at this location. And so Wolverine is proposing 5 nested well locations between just north of 12 Mile to try to get the boundary to the north. Here's a piezometer location that was 17 parts per trillion. So again, they want to go to the north to make sure nothing is flowing in further past that point. And then all the way down, so there's 1 location, 2 right here. It's kind of near, we had 130 parts per trillion in this area, 30, 24, so kind of the middle area they're targeting. Here is another nested set, the kind of teal square right by the highest result we received, and then 2 more down here to try to get on the outer edge of this piezometer location that was sampled that had 130 parts per trillion PFOS. So again, 5 locations there. And then in the Woven Northeast area, they are proposing 3 nested wells just north of this 16 PFOS result. And this pore water was not detected, so kind of right in between this 15 in the shallower portion and this 32 in the shallower portion as well. So again, they're proposing 1 location here, 1 nested well set here, and 1 nested well set here. So for a total of 3 nested sets in this northern Childsdale area. Highest result in this specific area was 79 parts per trillion of PFOS. The next slide, I wanted to kind of focus in on this northern area to show you how the pore water results matched up with what we have been thinking of the groundwater plumes could potentially be doing and discharging. Again, these were kind of our flow lines for potential plumes or groundwater flow paths from the Woven Jewel source area to the northeast. And you will see that the highest result is right here in the middle where, you know, we had concerns of potential plumes coming there. And again, we kind of knew there was multiple discharge points potentially along here, which is reflected in our pore water sampling results here as well in the river. Okay, so this is figure 6C of the reports, and this is kind of the main area that is southeast of the House Street site. So the House Street dump is up here, kind of off the map. The arm of that comes down to the southeast. Here's the Rogue River that flows down into the Grand River. And so as part of the November through January sampling, Wolverine had installed a number of pore water samples in here. And this had the most amount of pore water sampling actually out of all the areas. So you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I think there's about 15 total pore water sampling locations kind of in this area. This is where we found the highest result of pore water in the entire investigation, which unfortunately we were not very surprised at, considering it is the primary plume from the House Street dump site where it heads straight to the Rogue River. That highest sample location was at HS-PW3, pore water 3, and that had a concentration of 1,100 parts per trillion of PFOS. So quite a bit above the 12 parts per trillion water quality standards. So when Wolverine or GZA got that result, they kind of wanted to verify that since it was so high. So they remobed. This was kind of outside the scope and did a step out boring or pore water sampling to the south. That is pore water 3.5. There's 3 and then 3.5. And then they did one to the north at, I think just to the north, they labeled that 2.5, pore water 2.5. So, and again, they did find that, yes, this is kind of the major hotspot of discharge in this area. When they did the resampling, it verified that. When you get up to here, kind of up over this bend, water's flowing to the south, we're at 5.2 PFOS. We were non-detect up in here, non-detect at this monitoring well. So you can really tell, and you'll see on the next figure, how that PFAS is coming into the river at very high levels specifically in this area. You know, as we move further to the south, we have another high. Again, this is 92. So we kind of have the 900s, the 1,100, the 500s, you know, depending on the depths that you're at. We get down in here, we have a 90, 30 right in here, excuse me, 8.9. We do have a then uptick at 26, and then 8.2 down here. So Wolverine is proposing 6 new nested well sets in this area to try to get a better idea, including using an existing monitoring well, the MW29A in House Street. So this is where MW29A is. So Wolverine's proposing kind of in between this 5.2 PFOS and just to the north of this high level here, PW3. They're proposing a nested well set there, one right here where it kind of drops down to 92, just on the other side of this 13. So here's another one, so that makes 3. Then we have 4 and 5. And I think there's actually a couple that, and then 6, actually one down here too, that makes 6. Just to kind of get an idea of anything. We did have some potential concerns about, is there anything that could be coming down this way? So they did add 1 nested well set there. So yeah, let me go to the next slide. This again kind of shows you visually all the residential well sampling results. The circles are monitoring, the monitoring wells that are there are the triangles. Red means it's above criteria for drinking water. But again, you can see right where we have kind of this line here showing the primary plume. We have the highest result, that 1,100 right there. So unfortunately, that does match up. So the GSI investigation, kind of what Wolverine is proposing in this work plan, is for these kind of it seems to be like a month per nested well set. So they're proposing 17 months to complete this work. And obviously there could be some step outs that may be needed based on those results. So there's, you know, probably some additional clarification needed on, does that include the step outs, or would that, you know, how much time could that increase to? Maybe putting a cap on that. Then once the wells are mostly installed, you know, at least we don't have any more step outs that we need to do, then they'll start the quarterly sampling of the well network again for that 1 year. Following the full year of quarterly sampling, they have to submit within 180 days, no later than. They had to submit what's called a completion report that shows, yes, we did this work. Now, once they submit that completion report, there are some time requirements in there that states they would submit response activity plans to address the discharges into the Rogue River in those reports. So keep that in mind. And then also a note is that state retains the right to seek natural resource damages from Wolverine, you know, obviously, because this is a question that comes up a lot. So, you know, if Wolverine were to fail to complete any necessary response activities for the GSI pathway and any of their work plans that were approved by us, or they failed to address any PFAS contamination that is identified as venting into the Rogue River above applicable criteria, there is a section in the consent decree that talks about the natural resource damages. Just wanted people to be aware of that. So as far as this public comment period goes, we are taking written public comments through July 6, 2021. We did extend it. We didn't want it, you know, just 30 days. We wanted to add on some extra time because of the holidays and it being summer. We understand that can be difficult with folks' schedules. So we did add on those 10 extra days, and you can email those comments to the same email box that we've had for kind of all of these plans. That's eagle-rrd-house street at michigan.gov. House Street spelled out, HOUSESTREET. And so you'll send it there. Then we review the comments, we summarize all of them and put it in one document with some responses. And then we complete our review and provide comments back to Wolverine. So we've been doing that for the House Street feasibility study, for the Tannery interceptor system, and now we will be doing that for this plan as well. Once these documents are complete, we do post them onto our website. We try to get that done as soon as we can, based on our website folks having availability to get those posted. So you all can look at that on the michigan.gov//Belmont website where those are posted. And again, just a reminder, this is the email address that you can email me at, the eagle-rrd-house street at michigan.gov through July 6th. So July 6th, that whole day till 11:59 p.m. that day. Or if you prefer, you can mail them to our district office at 350 Ottawa Avenue, Northwest, unit number 10. And that's Grand Rapids, Michigan, 49503. If you don't want to, right away submit your final comments, but you want to talk offline with me or have some additional questions that maybe I could help answer before you submit your comments, that's okay too. That's what we're here for. You can call me on my work cell phone, which is 616-439-8008, or you can email me at vorske, VORCEK, at michigan.gov. Something we also remind you when submitting comments, just make sure you're clear on which plan you're commenting on, because we have so many, they're not all in open comments, but that way it is clear in our file and on the record which plan you are specifically giving comments on. And obviously, if anyone listening or viewing needs any assistance with providing your official comments in writing, contact me and we can help you with that as well. So that was a lot of information to share. And right now we're going to move on to the next phase of this meeting, I think, which is the Q&A portion, right, Les?
Yes, it is. All right, Karen, we'll just keep your slides up because we have several questions that have come in, which we were hoping for. I just want to do a quick voiceover reminder for typing in questions. We do have questions that have come in, but for our attendees, if you are interested in asking a question of the panel tonight, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box. Also, if you would like to ask a question verbally to the panel, please go ahead and raise your hand. There's a hand icon that should be available for you at the bottom of your screen if you would like to raise your hand to speak to the panel. And with that, let's start tackling these questions that we have. And we have several. Karen, if you are ready.
Yeah. And we have the panel here, so hopefully you won't just have to be listening to my voice.
Right. So whoever will help with these, it'll be great. The first question that we have deals with the pore water values and the values that were noted on your presentation this evening. The question is, why don't the pore water values increase going downstream? Is this the result of dilution or testing variances or something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mark, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, river systems are complex. So you're going to have mixing, like dilution, as you mentioned, as you add additional groundwater, as you add additional surface water, you're going to have mixing just as the river flows from its point of origination to its point of termination. And so that's why it's important to have your monitoring points where the plumes interact with the river to get your worst case of what is entering the river at that point.
It's also, could we say, Mark, that it's also an indication that you might have groundwater somehow, a more contaminated groundwater coming into contact with the river at that point?
Well, yeah, that's where the plume's entering. So, as it enters that point, then as you get beyond that point, you can have addition of groundwater that's not impacted. You're going to have addition of surface water, potentially depending exactly where you're at the river. And then again, just that turbulence of the river system would add to the dilution of the impact. And again, that's why it's really critical to key those monitoring points in exactly where you think the plumes are, or as your evidence builds up, to adjust them to where your plume would be most interacting with the river system.
Okay.
And Karen, can I just ask a follow-up question to that? I just want to make sure, I don't know if we've discussed it in this call or in previous calls, but the pore water samples themselves were taken, what, about 12 inches below the surface of the bottom of the surface of the river?
It gives the values of where in the sediment column the samples were taken. They tried to get one, based on the gravel bottom and some of the difficulties that they encountered, but they tried to get a deeper sample, kind of below, closer to the 2 foot, and then or even a little deeper than that, 1.5 to 2 feet, or and then they tried to get one, below that upper 12 inches as well. So you get the water as it's just before it's like venting into the river. We want that groundwater that we don't want the surface water. We want the groundwater that's still going to be entering into the river.
Okay. All right. Thank you, panel. Karen, during your presentation, you mentioned there were several pore water samples that indicated levels that were over 12 parts per trillion of PFOS. Can you or anyone on the panel address whether this is an indication of unhealthy contact with the river water? Is there any concern here?
Well, that's a good question. So our groundwater surface water interface values are not direct contact or skin contact values. So these are specific to the microbes that are living in the sediments, kind of the animals that are eating those microbes, and things like that. So that's why that level is 12 parts per trillion, because obviously these are very small organisms. PFAS is bioaccumulative, so that's why it's protective of those organisms. There are no, and again, this wasn't surface water that we're sampling. That's very important to understand. This is the groundwater before it enters the surface water. There is a foam advisory for the Rogue River, meaning areas, and really the DNR came out with guidance just before Memorial Day. DHHS, the state health department, and the Department of Natural Resources did a press release reminding residents that really any surface water body in the state of Michigan, if you see foam, whether you think it's naturally occurring or PFAS foam, just avoid it. Assume that it is PFAS foam. Assume that it's probably not good to touch anyway because of the bacteria. You're going to want to wash your hands if you do touch it because of bacteria or potential PFAS elevated concentrations. So it's just not physically possible for the state to go out and sample every single foam sighting throughout the state in any surface water body. So DHHS and DNR wanted people to be aware as we get into these summer months, again, and we already know we have an issue on the Rogue River. If you see foam, it's best not to play in it and eat it, or wash your hands before you eat a sandwich. That's why there's hand washing stations up at the tannery where we have the highest concentrations that we're dealing with to kind of wash your hands and things of that nature. So if you want more toxicological information on this, we can always get you in contact with one of our toxicologists as well, and they can probably do an even better job explaining what goes into these values and what risks there are or are not.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. We have a series of questions from one of our attendees. So I want to start with the first one. And panel, I think you may be able to see these here. So do the staff gauges have rating curves to calculate discharge?
Mark, what do you think about that? I think that these are just measuring the elevation of the Rogue River at the staff gauges, and they're surveyed in to a survey to account the elevation.
I'm unaware if that's been calculated for these particular gauges.
Okay, next question. Why was the data from the multi-parameter sound measurements collected during pore water extraction not included?
The what? Sorry.
I may not pronounce that right. I apologize. I'll read it again. Why was the data from the multi-parameter sound measurements collected? The question is whether or not some of the data that was collected, why was it not included during the pore water extraction, or why that data was not included during pore water extraction?
I'm not sure. I can't see the question, so
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly what they're
Abby?
asking.
Yeah, let me check with Abby.
Mhm.
Abby, do you understand that second question?
I'm not sure what the.
Are they talking
what,
about like the turbidity and kind
Yeah,
of the measurements so they know it's stable, if that's what they're asking for?
well, he's got a
Les.
particular measurement here. Why don't we have Rick unmute and he can ask his question directly, because I think
Okay,
that's a
his hand is raised, and I'll get him
Okay,
here.
that would be awesome.
that would be awesome, because I don't know if that's particular tool for surface water sampling, or if that's like our multimeter to do pH and temperature, turbidity.
Yeah, if it wasn't included, we could obviously ask for it for those documents, because they were taking those notes, because we did have AECOM out overseeing the sampling. So
Good evening. Do you have a question for the panel?
Yes, my question was, you're kind of answering it, but according to the CLAP, GZA was going to use the multi-parameter sonde to determine whether they were getting pore water or river water. It was a important measurement for QA/QC, and it was not included. So when we go to review the document, we can't tell whether they were within 10% or they had a greater than 10% difference between river water and the pore water. I would like to see that, and it wasn't included, and I think it should have been. They said they were going to do it, and
yep, I agree. That's a great question, and we can reach out to GZA to get copies of that pretty easily, I would assume, since they did take it. So
you haven't seen that information yet?
we were provided what was provided in the submittal, so
Okay.
the same as you.
So you really can't. Well, I can't, review the document without that information. We're going to try and go over it in the CAG meeting, but we really need that. The last question I had was, why was there no pore water samples collected on the east side of the river? There's obviously plumes entering from the east side, and everything was collected on the west.
Where on the east side?
When you get down to the House Street site, there's higher concentrations on opposite side of the Rogue River. You look at the plume.
No, I don't think so. I mean, Mark and I can go over that. Mark's shaking his head no. I don't.
I'm not aware of that. I think they were all on the west side, is other than the tannery itself, the plumes from House Street, the plumes from Owen Jewel all enter the
On
side
the west.
where the sampling occurred. I'm not aware of a plume entering outside of the tannery site itself in downtown Rockford. I'm not aware of another plume entering the river from the east side, unless there's data I'm unaware of, and there may be, I don't know.
Okay, when you look at the PFOS contour maps right by where the House Street plume enters the Rogue River, where that high concentration was, it does show elevated PFOS on both sides of the river.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
because
that it's just the
undercutting
boxes.
and the plume is undercutting the river as well as interacting with the river.
Yeah,
So that's undercutting.
Plumes all have multiple component depths. So, I mean, it should be no surprise that it undercuts the river there, and it probably undercuts the river in other locations as well.
Okay, so that's going underneath the river at that spot.
Oh, certainly.
yeah, that's why we have the sampling and the monitoring wells going on in that neighborhood down gradient of that location on the east side of the river.
You want to bring up your slide 16 again, Karen, because I think that really showed it well.
I can definitely try here.
Can you go back?
Are you talking about like right in here?
Yeah,
Yeah, so yeah, go ahead, Mark, if you want to talk about that more.
Well, yeah, so that plume is both interacting with, matter of fact, if you go to that location, you will find foam on the river pretty consistently. It also, and that's where the plume is entering into the rogue. It's also going to be undercutting the rogue there. That's the impact you see south to the south there. And there's probably some we don't have boring logs, and there's been no environmental wells installed, but there's probably some pretty interesting geology happening there, kind of maybe down by Blythefield, where there's probably some kind of bedrock high that's causing the plume to kind of. You have the plume that's interacting with the river and impacting wells to the south along the river, but you also probably have a plume that kind of kicks slightly to the southeast there as well. But again, that there's been no drilling. It just, if you look at topography, if you look at some of the well logs and plume distribution, you can kind of get a sense of that.
Yeah, and this is an area that has the groundwater investigation occurring. I'm trying to remember area 12 or area 11. That has some wells going in right here to try to better understand how that's coming down and figuring out, and also down in this area, there's some monitoring wells that are going to be installed to better understand that too.
And if we also look at kind of a distribution of contamination from another nearby PFAS site to the east, there appears to be somewhat of a groundwater divide between that site and this and the plumes from this site. So.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, the next questions that we have are tied to a person who has their hand raised. So I'd like to unmute this attendee so the questions can be asked out loud, if that's okay.
Perfect.
All right, so just a moment. Okay, good evening. You have a question for tonight's panel.
Yeah, I have a few, as you can
Okay,
see.
very good. Welcome. All right, go ahead.
Oops. Lynn, we
Hey,
can't
Lynn.
hear you.
She's unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Like I said, it's push and go here. Okay. All right. My first question is this time period. We clearly have violations of the 12 parts per trillion of PFAS going into the rogue in multiple locations. So I'm listening to what Karen said, and I'm counting 17 months to install 17 wells, 12 months to take quarterly samples, then 6 months to complete the report. I'm adding up to like 35 months, maybe 3 years. Could it be as far out as 5 years before any action is taken?
I think Danielle, are you on?
Mm-hmm.
I am.
Can't see her. Yeah, I think, would you be able to kind of explain how the consent decree works in that way?
Yes, so the obligations under the consent decree are to do the investigation. At the conclusion of the investigation, Wolverine can propose to take some sort of action to address the water venting to the Rogue River. If they do that, that will affect their liability, that will decrease their liability for natural resource damages and could eliminate their liability for natural resource damages. But the investigation has to occur first. And so I don't know that we are tied to the timeline that is proposed. That'll be for Karen and the Eagle team to evaluate whether or not the proposed timeline is acceptable. But this is one step in the process to determine what will be what, if any, action Wolverine will take at the river. If Wolverine chooses not to take any action, then the state can proceed and seek natural resource damages for damage to the river.
I do understand that, but if I'm adding up all the months, that's like 3 years now. And
Yeah.
then, I could imagine 5 years from now, if any action's being taken. I mean, this gives 3 years for nothing really for the investigation, and at 1 month per well, that seems like that could be stepped up.
I'd say that's a great comment to give us as part of
Okay,
your comments.
well, yeah, I will. I plan to make other comments. I'm very dissatisfied with that. We're talking about, and I guess this then branches out. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, we have the consent agreement. We also have the fact that a company is contaminating our resources now. Aside from the consent decree, my question is, will they be issued a violation notice? I mean, they're separate things. And in one way, they're similar, and another way, they're separate. If it wasn't Wolverine and you found this information out and there was no consent decree, what actions would be taken? Because I hope that there's some mechanism to hold responsible parties accountable, whether or not they're involved in a consent decree. I'm very discouraged by a long wait for even the possibility maybe of something being done. So that's my question. Can Eagle operate outside of the consent decree
So
to take
Lynn,
actions? Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate your consternation on the timing. I too feel like, I would encourage Wolverine to step it up. They do not have an obligation to wait the full timeline to give us a final report or to propose interim actions. They could propose doing some interim actions to stop these discharges at any time, and we would be open to that. But this is what is in the consent decree, and we're going to work within the consent decree because it is our best tool for leveraging a cleanup here. Outside of a consent decree, if it was any other liable party or any other site, yes, we would have under the water quality standards, Water Resources Division has been regularly entering into administrative orders by consent to address PFAS contamination entering.
And again, there's really no
groundwater.
timeline associated with those either. Those are negotiated as well. So
Okay, so they can
it-
step up. They don't have to wait till the
no,
11th
these are
hour.
drop dead dates. These are the
Oh.
hammers that we have that if
Okay.
they don't meet these, for
Yeah.
sure, okay, here we go. Now we're filing a claim. There's no way to wiggle out of this. You didn't
Okay.
meet that. You know what I mean?
right,
And
yeah,
so
cool.
far, they've
Mhm.
been working, all the other work they've been doing, they've been on schedule or ahead of schedule with all
Okay.
of the other plans. So I have no reason. So far, they've been showing they're doing the work, and obviously Eagle's hopeful that will continue.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where we're at, that we're
Okay, I see what you're doing. I see, yeah, it's the best tool that you have right now for that. That makes sense. Okay, I'm just putting the reality out there. This could
Yeah.
be quite a while before this stops. And it's very, very disconcerting that this is charging into our river 365 days a year, 24/7.
unfortunately, it's probably been happening since the 1960s.
Yeah, but we know about it now.
Now we
that's what's
know, yep.
hard. Yep. Okay.
I know.
Well, that being said, I'm going back. I'm not a scientist here. I've learned some things here and there. But I do recall that it seemed without fail, sampling was done during the winter months. And in some cases, that can give lower results for certain things. And then if you're going to base something on lower results, when you know, as a baseline, then it may not be the best science. And my question is, yes, I understand they're going to do quarterly sampling, but I would think, I'm guessing, again, I'm not a scientist, but I would think that spring and summer might give different numbers. And so I'm concerned about the first set of data becoming an inaccurate baseline.
No, I understand that, but the fact of the matter is we're dealing with, the limit is 12 parts per trillion. And if you look at these numbers, in most of the cases, 32 out of the 46 right away exceeded that. So the ones that were kind of near that, I'm sure, you know, we could be like, well, maybe we should step out again. Because again, wherever they put in these nested sets, they're going to have to step out until we know that we're below that 12 parts per trillion venting in the groundwater itself. So the pore water kind of helped us as a guide, but again, we're in some of these areas, we're so far over that, you know, even if there was the fluctuation, it makes sense with our conceptual site model as well that we're taking into account
Okay.
of where we have the groundwater. So that was something that in some cases you don't have that luxury of having that groundwater data that you can pair with the pore water data too. But I do see what you're saying, but in our case, we're really concerned with these permanent wells that are going to be able to be sampled quarterly and kind of help show, okay, this is how big the discharge area is. This is where the remedy would need to be implemented to capture as much PFAS as possible, if that makes
So,
sense.
in
That
layman-
makes sense. Yeah, I understand that. So
Yeah.
we have, go ahead.
And Mark,
We
I
have to
think, had
wait
something.
another year and a half before we start to get quarterly results. If they don't step
Based
it up,
on their proposed,
based on their
uh,
proposal now.
yep.
Okay. I
and Mark, I
also,
think Mark had
Mhm.
something to add to
oh
that.
yeah, please do,
too.
Mark. I'm sorry.
So I was gonna say that actually spring sampling could actually yield lower concentrations. But the concept is no matter what the season, your highest are still gonna be where your highs are. Your lows are still gonna be where your lows are. Proportionally, essentially, they're gonna stay the same. It's not like you're gonna have a low area jump really high and be disproportionate with the site conceptual model because we've built on all this other data. So it
Okay.
increased slightly, but it's not, I mean, and it might go over the criteria because the criteria number is so low, but it's
Right.
not, it's going to jump from a single digit number into the hundreds or thousands. It's still proportionally going to be the same. So as expected, predicted with the groundwater concentrations, the plume maps have been developed over the last few years. That was where our higher concentrations were
Okay.
compared
Okay.
to the results next to it. And those ratios really aren't going to change in a sense of your highs are still going to be where your plume is, and you step out, it's going to be lower and lower. And you might have higher concentrations in summer, but you also, you know, you might not have as much flow. I mean, there's complexities. Winter was the first available season when they were installed, and it gave data that was consistent with the site conceptual model.
Okay. Well, I
So-
appreciate your answering that. That does help. I know that foam and PFAS is more visible during the spring and summer. So, but again, the way all these things work is more complex. So I appreciate that.
Lynn, one final point for you, especially for this whole group is, I want to just remind everyone that unlike other chemicals, there is no mixing zones allowed for PFAS compounds, specifically
That's good.
PFOS. We don't allow mixing zones. So 12 is the number that they would have to comply to meet water quality standards. And so that is, you know, because of the bioaccumulation factors that occur with, especially in fish and in our bodies, we don't allow mixing zones for any of the PFAS chemicals. So they will have to design treatment systems that would actually, you know, be able to capture this before it gets into the river.
That is excellent piece of news. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, I have one last question about wells on the east side of the river. It does appear that some of the plumes that were showed when you were showing, and I don't know if it was Wolven West or I don't have it in front of me, but no, it was Wolven Jewel East, where it hits the Rogue River north of the tannery.
Mhm.
There were those hits of 230, 170.
Yep.
Again, living in Rockford, I need to point out that there are a lot of Wolverine properties north of the tannery, industrial, and also further to the east. So I'm hoping at some point, perhaps we could figure out if there are any plumes also coming in from the east, because I think that's a possibility. I don't know. It's just, I'm piggybacking on what Rick said. That is one area where maybe it would make sense.
Okay, we'll definitely keep that in consideration
All right.
in our internal discussions and see what we can.
Okay. Thank you so
find
much.
out about
I
that.
will send my other comments, but I really appreciate the explanation. I do understand it better. And
Well, we
So, yeah.
appreciate your comments because I think a
Okay.
lot of people probably were thinking the same thing as you.
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
could have asked them in fewer words, but hey, you can't do it all. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, thank you to the team here for tackling that. So we have another question. It's actually almost somewhat related, I believe, to the last caller's question, and it concerns the quarterly sampling, a year of quarterly sampling. The question relates to yearly variations in rainfall and other changes that could be missed, and wanted to know if wouldn't multiple years of sampling be better than 1 year of quarterly sampling?
Well, again, I think in this case, we're not wanting to really draw it out too long. And again, since we have such a low value to reach, it's just a matter of making sure we have the boundaries estimated well, and you just really have to get above that 12 parts per trillion. So we already are really seeing that with a single round of pore water sampling. And then this year of permanent wells, they'll still be there. Not to say that GZA wouldn't use those to continue to sample as part of their response activity plan to install the permanent remedy, whatever that may be. They will be there still to sample and look at. So just because the consent decree requires the 1 year, I don't think that those wells never will be ever touched again. It is useful data to use in pilot testing and designing some sort of remedy along the river, if that helps kind of address that. But again, we kind of already know, there's an issue. We have pore water well above the 12. Now it's just a matter of kind of looking at the groundwater, getting at least one seasonal round. That we know that those levels are going to be above 12. It's just kind of making sure we get to the edges of those areas. Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, it's the difference between a science experiment and actually taking care of the problem. You can study,
Mhm.
You can study these plumes, you can study these sites for decades till you feel absolutely 100% comfortable that you know everything, or you could get a gauge of the data and start to make things happen. And I, personally, my preference has always been get some information, get an idea what's going on, and start remediating. Again, there are different agencies that have a different perspective. They'll study these for years and years and years, but the damage is still happening. So get out and get the remedial actions, designed and undertaken, and you're better off.
Yep.
All right, panel. Presently, we don't have any new questions, and presently we do not have hands raised at this point. Just want to remind our attendees that we still have some time here. If you have questions for the panel, go ahead and either raise your hand or type your questions in the Q&A. and we'll get those addressed this evening. And I do have a hand. And before I take the hand, just want to remind everyone again that the webinar is being recorded and will be shared within the next day or so. So if you have additional questions, the video will be available for re-review. So I have a couple of hands. I believe I have one hand. So just a moment.
Hello?
Yes, good evening. Do you have a question for the panel?
I do, just real quickly. I hear that there is going to be step outs based on what is found, but then I also hear that there is number. Are those two things potentially in conflict?
Sorry, you cut out right when you said the second thing.
Okay, we have a limit on the number of wells, and yet we also have a commitment for step out. Is that potentially a problem?
Well, I would say in this case, based on the number of locations, we could wait and see and find out. There is a cap on there that kind of limits to the scope of this to those, but again, we're less than half that right now. We're at 17. The potential locations could be 40. So I still think we have a lot to play with based on that.
Yeah. I think I get what you're saying, AJ, but I don't know that, you know, there's a lot of river to cover. I don't know that when we originally discussed, you know, trying to put some boundaries on the numbers that we thought we were going to have to divide it among, what is this, 4 or 5 different plumes. You know, we knew we would find at least 2, but to find all of them and so accurately, I think, you know, I think Wolverine will have their work cut out for them to make sure that they're well defined. But can they do it with the number that they've got? I think they can probably get pretty close.
Okay, well, I mean, it just increases the need to make sure that the step outs are realistic.
Correct.
Not too close or too far.
Yep.
And I think it also warrants discussion with the AG of, you know, what are the remedies if the consent decree basically requires 2 things. One is step outs and the other is a cap. And I realize from Wolverine's perspective that, you know, you don't want to just go in with a blank check and, you know, put a well every 10 feet all the way along the road. But I mean, there needs to be the ability to address a real mutually recognized need for additional step outs. And I would hate to see that limited by an arbitrary number in the consent decree is all.
Yep. Appreciate that.
Okay, we have another hand raised from our attendees. Just a moment. Do you have a question for our panel?
Oops, looks like she's muted again.
She's muted again, yes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Oh my gosh. I have a college degree also, but I'm not mechanically gifted. Just a simple question. It's just, we're all adjusting to this, doing a public hearing via Zoom call, but there's no sense when I'm here on this meeting, like how many people are attending? How many people are listening?
Oh, sure.
Can we ever find out? You know,
Sure. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I meant to announce that before we started Q&A. At the height of the meeting, we had around 19 attendees. That doesn't include a staff here that are hosting and answering the questions tonight. There are approximately 19 folks that have registered in as attending the meeting.
Okay, that's good to know. Hey, you know, sometimes when you're asking questions, you think, okay, are there 4 of us here? But
Right.
you know, It's
Right.
it's an odd experience, right? And
It is.
so I'm just admitting that. So thank you for letting me know. Mhm.
Sure.
Okay.
You're welcome. And it's possible that there could be folks that are watching the webinar with others in the room with them. So, but there's at least there was at least 20 or 19 or 20 that were in attendance.
Okay.
as
Probably
well.
with families of 12 kids, right? So that really adds up. So
Yes.
hundreds. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Mhm.
So Les, before we finish up, or while other people are deciding whether or not they want to be brave enough to raise their hand, I do think that although we've gotten some great comments here tonight, it's really important that people put their comments in writing so Karen has them for the official record, and that they go ahead and submit them to her so we can include all of those great comments in that in our response and back to Wolverine for conclusion for this response activity plan.
Yes. And Karen, when is that due date?
July 6th. July 6th, which I believe falls on a Tuesday or a Wednesday.
Tuesday.
At
Okay.
at 9:59 p.m. You can,
Okay.
if you want to be like you're cramming for a college paper, you can submit it at 11:59 p.m. on July 6th.
Please don't.
All right. I presently do not have any new questions in the Q&A, and I do not have any hands raised. So, Karen, would you like to add some final comments for our remaining attendees?
Well, thanks for hanging on till the end. Hopefully, we were able to answer your questions. I think I have some follow-up items that I wrote down, so I'll be getting back with some of you on those. But yeah, feel free to share this once we get this posted with people who couldn't make it. You can share the link to the YouTube website or even to the House Street page. Can share that with them, let them know it's going to be there. There's still time for them to watch it before the July 6th date. And we just really appreciate the open dialogue, you being able to be here and ask the questions. And hopefully, even if we don't give an answer that you like, at least we're able to give you an answer and help answer your questions so you can make thoughtful comments on the plan. So thanks for being here.
Okay, Abby?
Ditto. Thanks everybody for being here, being part of the solution for this bigger discussion on PFAS and how it's affecting our state. So every positive action forward counts, and we're just going to keep moving forward to making our state a better place and free of PFAS. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Karen, Abby, Mark, Danielle, and I want to give a shout out to Mr. David Banlow, who is working behind the scenes with helping navigate the questions this evening. With that, this will conclude this evening's webinar. Please have a wonderful, enjoyable evening, and be on the lookout for the webinar video recording on the Eagles YouTube channel and on the Empire web pages. Thank you and have a great evening.